Yuichi is a high schooler who has been hospitalized for hepatitis C. Since he feels claustrophobic staying in the hospital, Yuichi constantly sneaks out at night. But Yuichi is often caught by his nurse Akiko, who scolds him. Yuichi is also friends with old man Tada, another patient at the hospital who likes to mess with Akiko. Yuichi lives a peaceful but boring life at the hospital and is often visited by his two friends Tsukasa and Tematsu. However, his nurse eventually gets sick of him sneaking out so much, so she blocks his door. But after watching Yuichi act depressed, Akiko makes a deal with him. If he can befriend a new patient at the hospital, she will let him sneak out. The new patient is Rika, a 17-year-old girl who enjoys reading Japanese literature. Since Yuichi is forced to be friends with her, he pretends to know Japanese literature, but quickly fails because he can't answer any of her questions. Rika accuses Yuichi of lying to her and makes him promise to obey her, and he is forced to do tasks like bring her books from the library. Eventually, Yuichi starts to read literature on his own and she starts to appreciate his presence. They have fun exploring the hospital together, and Rika later tells Yuichi that she suffers from a serious disease like her father, who died after a major operation. Rika makes Yuichi promise to help her hike up Mount Hodai, a hiking trail that she had meant to climb with her father until he died. Yuichi later sneaks out to spend time with his friend Tsukasa, but when he returns to the hospital he is told by Akiko that old man Tada had died. Tada's last wish was to give all his erotic magazines to Yuichi, who was his only friend. Affected by the old man's death, Yuichi manages to sneak Rika out of the hospital and avoid Akiko. They take a bike to go to Mount Hodai, and on the mountain Rika tells Yuichi she feels at peace. They talk about their families, but Yuichi passes out on the mountain. A panicked Rika calls for help and is able to get Yuichi off the mountain. After much scolding from the hospital, Akiko orders him to stop sneaking out. While sleeping, Yuichi remembers the advice from old man Tada, who gave him relationship advice. While Yuichi is recovering, Rika starts to watch over him, but he doesn't remember what he talked about during their time on Mount Hodai. After Yuichi gets better, he starts to get food for Rika again, and as the seasons pass into winter, his friends visit him as well. Truthfully, they are there to see Tada's collection, which has passed to Yuichi. But when Rika discovers the collection, she becomes incredibly angry and starts to set up pranks and traps for Yuichi. She even locks him out on the hospital roof. This causes Yuichi to become sick and he is assigned a new doctor, Dr. Natsume. Nurse Akiko tries to help Yuichi apologize to Rika, while Dr. Natsume explains to Yuichi Rika's history at the hospital, that Rika has never made a friend in the past, and that Rika normally kept her illness a secret to others. Dr. Natsume then gives Yuichi another magazine, which makes Rika angry again, and she locks Yuichi out of the hospital once more. A suspicious Akiko discovers that Dr. Natsume had been purposefully manipulating events for his own enjoyment, and he explains the situation to her. Over time, Yuichi and Rika become friendly again, although Rika is still suspicious of Yuichi and doesn't believe Dr. Natsume was influencing the situation. Yuichi tries to apologize for his behavior, and Rika seems to accept. The Yuichi becomes angry when he discovers that Dr. Natsume had ordered Rika to accept his apology. Yuichi also discovers that Rika is very close to Dr. Natsume, and she transferred to this hospital to be close to him. Yuichi expresses his distaste for the doctor, but during the argument, Rika's favorite book from her father accidentally ends up stuck outside on a hospital ledge. That night, Yuichi is in a bad mood, so he visits his friend Tsukasa. Tsukasa is a kind boy who often helps stray animals. After spending time playing video games with Tsukasa, Yuichi realizes that it is going to rain, which will damage Rika's book. He runs to the hospital and Tsukasa follows. The two of them try to rescue the book by lowering Yuichi down on a rope, but a strong wind almost knocks Yuichi off the building. Eventually, they rescue the book and Yuichi returns it to a sleeping Rika. Yuichi ends up getting sick from the rain, and he dreams of his friend Tsukasa, Mr. Tada, and reconciling with Rika. The next day he visits Rika and realizes that Rika had visited him the night before, and they had apologized to each other while he was sick. After Yuichi recovers, he destroys Tada's collection, silently apologizing to Tada. Dr. Natsume sees him burning the magazines, and Yuichi admits that he is burning them to make Rika happy. Yuichi later meets Rika and impresses her with his growing knowledge of Japanese literature, and they later go to the roof to spend time with each other reciting lines from literature and poetry. Meanwhile, Rika's mother arrives at the hospital and Dr. Natsume gives her the unfortunate news that Rika seems to be getting worse. Later that night, Yuichi is sneaking out and runs into a drunk Dr. Natsume. Dr. Natsume says that his feelings are fleeting and that his friendship with Rika will be running out of time soon. After Yuichi lashes out at Dr. Natsume, the doctor beats up Yuichi and calls him foolish for thinking that life had happy endings. After the doctor leaves, an injured Yuichi reads a fantasy novel Rika gave him. But Yuichi realizes that in the book Rika's favorite character dies, and he starts to wonder if the doctor's words were right all along. Meanwhile, the doctor returns to his office to cry about Rika's worsening condition. The next morning, the doctor visits Yuichi on the roof and uncomfortably apologizes to him. Dr. Natsume admits to Yuichi that he only became a doctor to look cool, and the stress of the job is starting to wear on him. The doctor then tells Yuichi to leave and to treasure Rika. Yuichi later visits Rika, but she becomes concerned after seeing his injuries. Yuichi hides the fact that Dr. Natsume beat him up by claiming to have gotten into a fight with some thugs. To make up for fighting thugs, Rika makes Yuichi promise to take a picture of her. Yuichi goes to sneak out to get a camera, but Akiko catches him and follows. While Akiko drives Yuichi to his house, she admits that it is strange for a famous doctor like Dr. Natsume to transfer to the remote rural hospital in their town. After getting the camera from Yuichi's house, they also pick up a former classmate of Akiko called Misako. The next day, Yuichi and Rika go to the roof so that he can take a picture of her, and while on the roof she asks Yuichi about his school life, because she has never been able to go to school because she has been so sick all of her life. Yuichi decides to try to help Rika go to school for just one day, by pretending that she has a real school day. With his friend's help, Yuichi gets a schoolgirl uniform for Rika, and helps to sneak her into his school. However, while at school a teacher catches them, and although Rika wants to speak up to explain the situation, the boys end up knocking the teacher out to avoid getting in trouble. Separated from the boys, Rika speaks with Yuichi's friend Miyuki, who is a childhood friend of Yuichi. Miyuki described the childhood Yuichi had and they head to an empty classroom. Rika then explains to Miyuki that she isn't afraid of dying, but she asks Miyuki to keep this a secret from Yuichi. Although Rika enjoyed the outing, she and Yuichi are later punished by the hospital for sneaking out together. And when they suffer the punishment together, Rika gives Yuichi another book but tells him not to read it until she says so. But while spending time with each other on the roof, Rika suddenly passes out. Rika is taken to the intensive care unit of the hospital for her medical emergency, and Yuichi has barely any time to see her. Yuichi later confronts Dr. Natsume, and he asks about Rika's condition, but the doctor brushes him off. Akiko later admits that Rika is not recovering well. Yuichi is later able to visit Rika for a limited time after Akiko sneaks him into her room. Meanwhile, Rika's failing condition makes Dr. Natsume think about his deceased wife, who had died many years ago when the doctor was younger. Feeling depressed, Yuichi sneaks out again and runs into Akiko's friend Misako. Misako drives Yuichi to her apartment, where she talks about her life as a former model in Tokyo. Later, Misako tries to seduce him, but they are discovered by Akiko. Akiko punishes both Yuichi and Misako, and returns a depressed Yuichi back to the hospital. Akiko warns Yuichi not to mention Misako to Rika, and if he mentions this incident with her, the nurse will kill him. The next day, Yuichi is approached by Dr. Natsume while on the hospital roof. The doctor also advises that Yuichi keep the incident with Misako a secret to Rika. Yuichi watches as Dr. Natsume practices his hand movements, since the doctor will be performing the emergency operation for Rika soon. He tells Yuichi that this is the first time that Rika is excited about an upcoming operation, and that Rika's mother gave Rika the choice to do the risky operation. Miyuki later arrives with a school uniform to give to Rika so she can remember her visit to the school. Rika also gives one more book to Yuichi to read before she goes into surgery. While Rika is in surgery, Yuichi waits for the results, but Akiko tells him that it will likely take a very long time. Akiko also tells Yuichi that Rika wanted to take photos, because Akiko had previously shown her a photo of Yuichi. Rika saw how happy Yuichi was in the photo, and she wanted to have a photo of her own as well. Rika also tapped the photo of him to her leg as a good luck charm. While waiting, Yuichi reads Rika's book, and realizes it is a short love story and is ultimately Rika's love confession. Overwhelmed with emotion, Yuichi retreats to the hospital roof to cry. Rika's operation finishes, and Dr. Natsume tells Yuichi that Rika is in a fragile state like her father was, but that she is still alive after the operation. Yuichi tries to go to Akiko for answers, but she can't sneak him into the intensive unit to see Rika. Akiko tells Yuichi to go back to his room to wait. But an impatient Yuichi goes to the roof to see Dr. Natsume, and he confronts the doctor about Rika's condition. The doctor warns Yuichi not to get too close to Yuichi, and that the results of her operation are under doctor-patient confidentiality. Akiko later confronts Dr. Natsume about keeping the results of the operation from Yuichi, and she reveals that she knows that the doctor had beat up Yuichi before. The doctor tells Akiko that circumstances have changed and it is better for Yuichi to avoid Rika. The doctor later meets with Yuichi and warns him to stay away from Rika due to her fragile condition, and that her mother was not happy to see him around Rika. If he will not stay away from Rika, the hospital will discharge him. Later, Miyuki visits him and tries to persuade him to see Rika, but he refuses. Dr. Natsume later meets with Akiko, and he tells her that in the past he was an ambitious doctor with a happy marriage. But his wife became deathly ill, and he was faced with the terrible choice of either spending his remaining moments with her or pursuing his career ambitions. Yuichi overhears the conversations and inadvertently realizes that the doctor was trying to prevent Yuichi from facing a similar terrible decision. But after seeing her favorite book, Yuichi decides to go see Rika. Yuichi calls all of his friends and they form a plan to lower Yuichi down from the water tower to see Rika, as he cannot use the hospital door and roof to get to Rika's room. Yuichi starts to rappel down the hospital wall, but almost falls when the line snaps. He is saved by his friends but becomes injured. A delirious Yuichi dreams about all the advice given to him, which gives him the energy to climb the rope and try once more to swing to Rika's room. Finally, he is able to make it to Rika's balcony, but is confronted by Rika's mother. She tries to refuse him, but Rika insists from her bed, and Rika calls him an idiot for sneaking into her room from the balcony. Yuichi asks Rika if he can be by her side forever, and Rika warns that they will not have much time together, and he will have to give up a lot of things for her, but Yuichi promises to be by her side. Meanwhile, Dr. Natsume tells Akiko that he gave up all his ambitions to stay with his wife until the end, and after she died the doctor lost her and his career. Akiko confronts the doctor's pessimistic worldview and states that ever since Rika has met Yuichi she has smiled and laughed for the first time, and it is better for them to be together even if it won't be for long. Weeks later, Rika is feeling well enough to visit Mount Harai again, and the new couple make the visit once more, and atop the mountain they kiss, treasuring however much time they have left together. And this is all for this video. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.